Okay, welcome. My name is Stacy Patton, and welcome to another episode of Strickland. I am without my host today, Shwini Poo. So it'll be me taking you through this, but I am joined by a very special guest, Mat Issa, basketball writer. You may have seen him in Forbes and in sportscasting. Does a great job covering the NBA. Has definitely been a Knicks sympathizer more than maybe the the NBA Twitter world at large, or certainly has been very fair to us. But yeah, without further ado, Mat, welcome. How you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. There's one thing like I just can't like I can understand like a general distaste towards the extensive coverage the Knicks were getting during some of their down years. But like this iteration of the team, like I remember the game that sticks like vaguely in my head is that regular season game against the Pacers, emotional victory. Brunson gets the he's being interviewed. I can't remember who's interviewing him, but he says like we're always gonna fight. He never stopped fighting, and it's just like things like that. Like, how could you hate this team? Like, I listened to that interview like every day for the next like 4 days when I was working out, just because like it's like so inspiring, like how gritty they are. Um, yeah, great team, good vibes. I like good vibes. I sympathize with the good vibes.
Yeah, it's fascinating because it's what's been traditionally called a New York mentality team.
Mhm.
And New York has changed, I think, from the days when that became popular, like the 70s Knicks and all of that, like the gritty, like New York is a little different now. But they definitely embody that. We're definitely very happy to watch this team. Very thrilled to get more of your thoughts than you shared. Before we start, just want to remind you BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games to spread against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get on in a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get on the action. Bet online. The game starts here, and the game has very much started for these New York Knicks this summer. After many years of very patient and methodical strategy from the Leon Rose-led front office, we've very quickly accelerated. This was the team that was making the kind of moves like trading for Derrick Rose, right, which was win-win situation. Detroit, didn't really have a role for him at the time. They got to take a flyer on Dennis Smith, who, by the way, has really turned around his career and found a niche as a defensive specialist. Those are the kinds of moves they made. Marginal moves on draft night to accumulate compensation. Then the OG trade was the first really big swing where they traded significant assets, and that was just portended what's to come. The Mikal Bridges this summer trade with 4 first-round picks. That's unheard of. It's the kind of price the Knicks had balked at previously for guys like Donovan Mitchell. And then you have this week the Karl Anthony Towns trade, which involved not just Randall, but the Knicks' all-time leading three-point shooter in Dante DiVincenzo for a season. I obviously have a lot of thoughts. I've shared them. Mat, you wrote a great piece on Brunson and kind of the heliocentric style. And you had a scoop on Dante this week. Let's talk about that first. So,
Mhm.
to the extent that you can share, what were you hearing really about Dante DiVincenzo? Because I think that this was something that surprised people. It's like maybe this still applies to a guy like Josh Hart, but the idea that the Nova Knicks was something they really prioritized. And you see it because Josh Hart and Brunson are basically inseparable. They have the show together. Dante did the show with them. He seems to be close with them, but it wasn't maybe the same thing. So let's start there. What was kind of what you heard about that?
Yeah, so I was shocked when it happened because I was like when the trade happened I wasn't that shocked like that it happened because I'm like you do have to trade good pieces to get great players like Karl Anthony Towns is. I was more like kind of sad because I'm like man like I just wanted like more than anything in this life for Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, and Dante DiVincenzo just ride off into the sunset together. Like it seemed like such a wholesome thing. It's like it reminded me, and I'm sure you could relate. It's just being like with my buddies in college. Like I wish like I could like kind of like have like an entourage like experience like post college with my best buddies. So seeing them do that's awesome. Whatever. So I was sad, and obviously, I did my due diligence, tried to reach out to a couple of the sources I had, and then one of them really close to the situation, he ended up saying something to me that really just raised my eyebrows, was that, like Dante wasn't happy. And so I don't think that it was like the guys. Like I don't think it's Brunson and Hart and Mikal were like getting on his nerves. I think it was like the idea of like the Nova Knicks and what it meant for his bottom line, which is, he's gonna be coming off the bench like after having the best year of his career. Doesn't really sit too well with a guy of that caliber. Who's he should start. He should start on a lot of NBA teams. He's a pretty good player. So I think that was.
Last year he was Buddy Hield with better defense and passing.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Which if that was a thing, Buddy Hield would have been made even more money, right? So
yeah, a great shooter. Not afraid to pull it, which is a huge thing. A little bit of closeout attacking game, although he's a little bit inefficient as a driver when it comes down to it. But then like really heady player, high motor defender, gives you that secondary rim protection, yada yada. So it's like a really talented player. I understand why he wants to start and why he might have feared getting overshadowed. And so I think the Knicks, they're doing is just trying to get on top of it before his value got diminished. So they flipped him. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
I am curious on that, just specifically on the Dante piece of this trade. Mm-hmm. So they get, I personally think that we went from having, Randall can shoot threes and it's not like people leave him open, but Cat is, for any position, one of the best shooters in the league. So I think the positional value of having a 40% shooter there versus even Dante, who's higher volume at the 2, is pretty big. How much value? I'm just curious from a basketball perspective. Like Mikal Bridges shoots over 10 threes a game, 10 threes per 100, and 37% last year. But a lot of that was, not great context. That's a guy who can get up to 40%, close to it, in double digits, 3 per 100. He's a big time shooter. What I don't see from Mikal Bridges as much is pulling up from either the logo or like that kind of like deep range, right? Like several feet behind the 3-point line as much. Even Jalen Brunson, who had a phenomenal shooting season, which probably got overshadowed. The one thing Jalen Brunson probably did that did get overshadowed by DiVincenzo was just how awesome he was from 3. But, you could notice that when he was pulling up from several feet beyond the arc, it was not as effective. DiVincenzo has that. In your personal opinion, how much does that extra few feet warp things, and change things from for shooters, even if the accuracy remains, if it's, we always talk about shooters 40%, 35%, whatever the attempts per game. How much do you think that extra, few feet matters?
Yeah, I think it was Caitlin Cooper wrote a couple of years ago on 538, back when that used to be a thing, about the value of the deep spacing with Eric Gordon. So just being able to stretch out the floor more, create more spacing, create more driving lanes is huge. And then just having that conviction to pull the trigger as often as DiVincenzo did, which he was in the 90s percentile in 3-point attempts per 100 last season. So it's important. I think mechanically, just the way Mikal shoots his shot, I have a hard time believing he can get enough energy transfer from his lower body, because I feel like he used a lot of upper body on his jumper. So I feel like he has a hard time getting in those deep 3-pointers, but he can still, he's a flamethrower, plus spacer for that position. So, and then obviously what you're getting from Cat, that guy's a gunner, even if he's not shooting it from as deep as Dante. Like you said, it's probably more valuable just because at the 5 spot, who are you going to find that's a better spacer than him? So the spacing hit. Okay, actually, just let me go overarching for a second. I think the big takeaway for this trade from the Knicks perspective is that it enhanced their ceiling, lowered their floor. So I think the big thing you're going to lose with DiVincenzo is he's reliable. He's going to play a lot. He's going to play a lot of minutes. He's going to be around for a lot of games. And he's just you lose 2 bodies for 1. So that automatically gives you less depth. Less depth you have, the lower your floor is. But yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know
no,
if I answered your question or I'm just scatterbrained.
no, I think that makes perfect sense. I'm actually gonna get super nuanced here to like
Mhm.
kind of not maybe not super nuanced, but do you think because you mentioned the kind of the upper body part of it, do you think that is I think Kevin Durant is the big exception to this kind of hypothesis I'm posing. Do you think that's a thing where like people who focus on mid range and get really good at it, it's tougher because you do just inherently use more upper body because your legs get taken out from under you, right? If you're taking those contested middies, so you see that even Brunson has taken time to extend his range. DeRozan was phenomenal mid range shooter, didn't really up that 3-point volume. I'm curious if like you think there's like a trade-off there, like being a great contested mid-range shooter, but not being able, but just because of the mechanics of the shot, that doesn't translate to deep threes.
Yeah, there was a scout at the combine 2 years ago that I talked to, and he was explaining to me that one thing that they look at, and this I don't know if this answers your question or not, for college players is they always look at their long 2-point percentage when trying to figure out their touch indicators, because that means if you're a good long 2-point shooter in your youth, that means that you have great touch. It's just you don't have the lower body strength to shoot threes that well. So, yeah, I definitely think there's a correlation there.
Yeah, definitely very interesting. I do want to get back to kind of the Knicks side of this trade.
Mhm.
Before we even get into Cat, before they got Cat, you wrote a really great article. We'll put it in the show notes. But on kind of I think it was a great encapsulation because this is something that Knicks fans are worried about going back to the Heat series, right? The Knicks played the Heat. The question everyone has talked about is Brunson a 1A. The question a lot of Knicks fans had is he probably is. He finished that series 31-38-41 against an elite defense, and ended up going to the NBA Finals. But the Knicks he was putting up those numbers, and the Knicks were still topping out at barely 100 points a game. The game they lost, he had 41, and I think they lost like 96, 92. The question was not, is he a 1A? It's like, can you win this way, right? Which is the question with
Mhm.
Harden. I think you mentioned, a couple teams that won that way. But the Knicks kind of having a bunch of guys who are good and complementary, kind of making them different. I'll open the floor to you. One, if you want to expand on that and kind of tell us, like if you think this is really a team. I am going to put you on the spot at the end of this episode, by the way, and ask you if we can be Boston. The what I don't know how much Cat makes, but $X million question. But also, just your thoughts kind of there and why this Knicks team could be different, with Brunson shouldering such a heavy load, not just shooting, obviously, but just having the ball so much.
Yeah, so the idea of the article that Stacy's alluding to basically is I was trying to look at the supporting cast of heliocentric players, right? So I looked. So okay, first of all, let me do this thing real quick. There's a logical fallacy out there. I'm going to mispronounce it. It is learned about in grad school. It's argumentium ad ignorentium, right? Again, mispronounce it. I'm a writer, not a speaker, but so basically it means like it's the idea that just because it's the mistake that just because something hasn't happened doesn't mean it can't happen, right?
Absence of evidence is not evidence
Yeah,
of absence. Or,
exactly, perfect.
yeah.
Um, and so I think a big thing you see a lot in the zeitgeist, the Twitter sphere, their little niche community. It's like you can't win playing heliocentric basketball, and my thinking is that you can win. It just a lot of times when you do use this heliocentric style, it's because your roster is lackluster. Like I think of the OKC team the year after Kevin Durant left, right? Russell Westbrook trying to just will them to wins. Like
He
they
won
kind of had to
MVP, right?
wins MVP, right? They only win like 46, 47 games, losing the first round, whatever. And people will point to that and be like, see, you can't win that way. The problem is, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with like what Russell Westbrook's like style of play is doing like that. It worked. Like he won them all those games. But the problem is if you look at his supporting cast, it lacks spacing, perimeter defense, a rim runner, like the things you need, a secondary creator, the things you need to properly flank a heliocentric creator, right? And so my theory was that you can win this way. You just need a supporting cast that can do that. And this is pre-cat trade, right? I'm thinking, like, from where I'm sitting, I'm like, this Knicks team, it may have the best heliocentric supporting cast I've ever seen, like in the history. Like, and I do, I tried to go through some measurements, checking like the average BPM of teammates, and the Knicks grade out pretty high. It wasn't the highest. The highest actually those that Rockets team that pushed the Golden State Warriors all the way to 7 games. By the way, that should be enough evidence to tell you can win with heliocentrics. And when you beat, arguably the greatest team, you almost beat arguably the
That
greatest
was
team
with Chris
ever.
Paul out, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. So that's besides the point, though. And so I'm looking at this like Rockets. I mean, this Knicks team, right? I'm comparing them to like some of the Luka Doncic teams, right? Where it's like, Doncic is heliocentric, and he's got his rim runner, but he's got like these flawed 3-and-D guys, right? Like they're either on defense, or like they can't really shoot that well, or all they can do is shoot and defend. They can't really put the ball on the floor. And I'm looking at this Knicks team, and I'm like, has there ever been a heliocentric star who has literally the two best 3-and-D forwards, wings, whatever that money can buy right now? Like Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby are the two best 3-and-D players in the NBA. Have we ever seen that before? And so my whole theory is like, this is like this team can show us how far heliocentrism can go. Now, that was before the cat trade, and I do think the depth component it changes the math a little bit, especially if one of those guys goes down. It's not like you have Dante DiVincenzo anymore waiting in the shadows. We know Josh Hart can play like 5,000 minutes a season. Jalen Brunson will play with one hand if he has to, but the depth is scary. But overall, my premise is that like this team could be a really good case study for heliocentrism in its limits.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. I think one what if. Let's also just preface this by saying Jalen Brunson is not LeBron James. I think he is good enough to be a 1A on a championship team, but yeah, he's not that. But I think a big what if to your point was that was one of the most heliocentric playoff runs I've seen by necessity. I'm talking about the first time they played the Warriors in the finals. They lost in 6 games. They went up 2-1 with Matthew Dellavedova harassing Steph Curry and becoming a household name, which I don't think anyone would have predicted. But, the point is they didn't have Love, they didn't have Irving, so it turned into that. I definitely agree on the depth. But, I also think, you're using BPMs. There's a lot of turnover on this roster, right? So those BPMs are going to change, right? For example, you would imagine that Bridges should go up with better contact.
I tried to adjust for that as well. Not to cut you off, sorry. But I used his Phoenix Suns BPM eventually later on, but that's besides the point.
No, I see that now, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, it was a negative 0.4 last year, went up to 0.8 in 2022, 2021, again, as a third option, which is what he's going to be very much, especially now. But I do wonder, this is, I mean, it's tough to quantify this. I think NBA teams probably have their own models that do these kind of things. You sacrifice depth, but let's pretend for a minute that Cat doesn't play a minute at the 5. Like he's just a 4. Mitchell Robinson and Precious Achiuwa play all the minutes, right? Let's say this playoffs because Mitchell Robinson won't play until December or January. Even if you just replaced Randall with, again, a 40% 3-point shooter, and I think Towns approximates at least everything else that Randall does. I mean, that should give you some, not just Brunson, but even a guy like Mikal Bridges now has more space, right? A guy like OG Anunoby, who flashed some driving ability, he flashed a really good mid-range game actually in the playoffs, which will be important, and we can get into that in a minute. But I think one thing I've heard people say is, well, if you put a wing on Brunson, his ISO game decreases. But how much does that counterbalance maybe the loss of, because you're losing a great BPM guy, a great advanced stats guy, and Dante, guy whose advanced stats production was on par overall, kind of just looking overall with Cat without looking at some of the synergy. How much benefit do you think the Knicks are going to get from that? Just from, spacing is the lazy way to put it, but it seems that it should just open up so much for everybody else on the roster, right? Even being so high on some of these players.
Here's like a really simple thing I was thinking about yesterday. Very, very simple thing, right? So Brunson, he's obviously a little smaller guy, right? And he's got good vision and everything, and he tries his hardest. But like when you throw two defenders at him, it's going to slow him down for a second. It's hard to see over two guys who are like 6'8", 6'9" when you're like 6'1", 6'2", right? So when he would run pick and roll with a guy who likes to roll, it takes him a second to hit that pass. Sometimes he'll miss that pass, right? Now with Cat, a guy who likes to pop on these pick and rolls, it's a much easier pass to throw it behind you like that. Like just a simple thing like that, like what Cat can do for you with that kind of spacing. It'll
You tweeted about that today, I think, right?
yeah, exactly. So it's just a little thing like that. There's so many little things like that. Or like for example, like you said, like if you put a wing on Jalen Brunson, right? Unless your team is all wings, okay, unless you're playing the Boston Celtics, who like you said we'll talk about later. That means that you're gonna have a guard guarding either Mikal Bridges or OG Anunoby. And it wouldn't take that much work to have Cat do an off-ball screen for them, try to seal the guard that's on Mikal Bridges, and get a little seal post up, Aaron Gordon style finish around the rim, right? Like there's just like these mismatches you create when you have that functional size.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's huge for this team. Going so the Knicks are going to be without Mitchell Robinson for the
Mhm.
first couple of months. If you look at the numbers in Minnesota, Cat was actually really, especially last season, him and Gobert were really good together. I didn't parse out the with or without Ant lineups, but that's pairing seems to work, which is encouraging if you're going to, the Knicks are rumored to be shopping Mitchell Robinson. That bodes well. I think that bodes well for him playing with Precious Achiuwa too, by the way. But you have those things, but Cat is going to have to play a lot of five, right? From what's kind of your take on Cat's defense, and how much? And I think I'll add this. One thing I've been thinking about a lot recently, not just after this trade, but definitely for the last, like, if you remember the Bulls, in the 2021 offseason, I believe they get DeMar DeRozan, they sign Lonzo Ball, and I was a huge skeptic. I was very much offended that people would put my 4 seed Knicks consistently below the Bulls in preseason rankings, because the Bulls were trotting out Vucevic as their rim protector and two poor defenders in Zach LaVine and DeRozan in the backcourt. And I was like, you think Caruso and Lonzo are going to make up for that? And they did. Lonzo could guard. Lonzo was guarding Julius Randle down the stretch of games when we played them. Caruso is, we all know about how effective he is as a defender, all NBA caliber defender. And it worked. They made a bet that you have this much creation and those two wings can make up for that. It seems to me that when Cat is playing the five, the Knicks are making a similar bet. Now the Bulls for half a season, they were like one of the top two teams in the East. I think they had a top 10 or top 5 defensive rating even, which shows they weren't just surviving on defense. They were actually really good. And I do think, the Bridges OG combo is comparable to that combo. I also think Cat is probably a better defender than Vucevic. Maybe that's a misnomer. I think that a Hart or Deuce or whoever would be in that lineup is a better defender than DeRozan or LaVine, whichever one you want to pick. But how much do you think? Like, how do you think about that? Like the wings kind of covering up for maybe a not, and how bad is Cat? How much does Cat compromise you regular season and playoffs? I would imagine it's more severe against a team like Boston, but yeah.
I mean, Cat's not, no way to slice this. He's not a great defender. But we just saw, like, look at the Denver Nuggets, right? Look at that starting five before they made the mistake of letting KCP walk in free agency. If you really think about it, they only had two great defenders, and neither one of them were centers. You got KCP, Aaron Gordon, right? Two fringe all league caliber defenders. And after that, it's just they relied a lot on communication, buy-in, effort, trust, all these like things like that you can coach up as a coach, right? And I mean, Tom Thibodeau, he knows how to squeeze out every drop out of a lemon, right? And so you have similar build here. You got Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, two elite defenders. We're talking all league caliber guys. You got Josh Hart, who's a better defender than like somebody like MPJ, I would say. So even though MPJ does have that length and the rim protection and whatnot. I mean, Cat's not Jokic. He's not as cerebral of a guy as him. But we saw last year, like he bought in, he played well. And another underrated wrinkle here is he's going to be a great guy to have when we have to go up against I'm not.
Freudian slip.
Freudian
I
slip.
thought it was
Freudian
Detroit
slip.
versus everybody, man. Come on.
Yeah, Freudian slip. But when the Knicks have to go after against the 76ers, you know, they didn't have a great option to guard Joel Embiid. Now you got Cat, who just did a phenomenal job guarding Jokic, to throw him. So in some situations, he might help them out even more. So I think I don't see it being. I mean, look at what was it 3 years ago? The year that it was Ant, D'Lo, Jared Vanderbilt, Cat, and I'm blanking on who the other guy in that starting lineup was right now. But they were
Rui?
like, huh?
Rui?
No. It wasn't.
Wait, you said Cat? You had said AD, Bron.
No. It was D'Lo. I see where you get the Lakers thing. It's D'Lo, Ant.
Oh, you're talking Minnesota. D'Lo.
Jared Van. I just realized that two of those guys are Lakers. Ant sounds a lot like AD. No, but we got. Now I've lost my train of thought. D'Lo, Anthony Edwards, Jared Vanderbilt, Cat. It was the year Cat was at the 5. It was that first year the Timberwolves made the playoffs. After
was it Beasley?
Maybe Beasley. That's a really small lineup.
Or Josh Okogie, maybe. I don't think he ever started for them though. But
no. Not this is here. You know what? We're gonna commit the podcast in right now because I need to know this. I need to know. It was. I guess so. Jaden started a little bit. Pat Beverly started quite a bit. Okay.
They had kind of a
really small lineup. Jeez. So you're telling me they were starting D'Lo, Pat Bev, and Jared Vanderbilt, Cat, and they were like a middle of the pack defense, slightly above average defense. There you go. Right there. Boom. Slightly average with that unit. A Cat the 5. Playing at the level, communicating, using his hands.
I mean, it does sound like. So, how would you best deploy Cat in pick and roll? Is that?
Yeah, it's probably at the level. I mean, he's got good hands. I feel like he seems really comfortable in that situation.
He's not as good moving backward and forward, right? So that's why drop is so tough for him.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even that much that portion of it. It's just like he's not like this giant statuesque figure in the paint for you to want him just kind of sitting back there. Yeah, and he's not good at, like, as Brook Lopez is, kind of like swiping at the ball while he's backpedaling. It's kind of better if he's just up at the level doing that whole shindig. But yeah, he probably at the level. I think last year, I mean, they had him hedge. They did have him drop a little bit. Definitely don't want him switching that frequently. Yeah. So, well, I think that the Cat defense, I don't think that's a problem. Like the Cat defense of the 5 thing, and the offense is gonna be phenomenal. It's really just like the depth. It's just like, what if one of these guys goes down? Because if one of them goes down, and Mitchell Robinson never gets healthy, things get shaky. You know?
Yeah, I mean, especially after last year, you don't have to tell Knicks fans about that. Where basically I think the last Game 7 against Indiana, if you've ever seen Space Jam, the first one, there's a scene.
I've seen it plenty of times.
There's the scene where Michael Jordan is looking at the bench, and there's like people in incubator or people like Looney Tunes in incubators and shit. And he has to pick Wayne Knight, Stan. That's where the Knicks were at, and they do have a lot of injury-prone players. OG Anunoby is one of the most important players on the team. Obviously, you don't get him for what the Knicks got him without a first. Obviously, Quickly was a big loss, but you don't get him for that price without the kind of injury caveats. Otherwise, Toronto probably would have just paid him. Mikal Bridges, knock on wood, has been very healthy for most of his career, but you don't know that. Well, he has been, hasn't he?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He hasn't missed a game since high school.
Yeah, I mean, imagine, and he didn't even take a game off in Brooklyn. I would have taken a few games off. Oh, coach, I think I might have COVID. Um, but
You never miss an opportunity to play with Jalen Wilson.
oh yeah, I saw your tweet about that. One-time Michigan commit. Um, to play, we could have had a
Isn't he?
Franz.
Is he DJ Wilson's brother?
I don't. No, he's not.
He's not. No relation.
Nah, we did have a DJ Wilson, Mo Wagner front line, so we could have had another Wilson, and I loved that lineup. They ended up, I think they lost to Oregon, Dylan Brooks' Oregon team in the Elite Eight, but
Okay.
that Franz Wagner and Jalen Wilson would have been a fun wing set. Yeah, so I mean, Hart also before last year did have some seasons that were shortened. He had an abdominal injury that he's coming off of, so there's definitely concerns there. And I would imagine the Knicks are going to keep looking for ways to. They signed Chuma Okeke. Any thoughts on Chuma Okeke, by the way?
No, none at all. Actually, I'm sure he's a really cool dude though.
He was someone. It was interesting. Seems like a Tibbsy guy from the drafts and like that Okoro mold. We knew. I mean, the Knicks were rumored to be very much in love with Isaac Okoro the first year they got Tibbs, for probably pretty obvious reasons. I think that they're going to try to round out the roster. There's some upside and downside, right? Like, does Deuce McBride come down to earth from three, or does he maintain it, right? Does Precious Achiuwa continue to grow? He was the first few games he played for the Knicks, people were like, put Jericho Sims in over him. Turned into, a guy who was defending Embiid. I do want to talk about that specific matchup now.
Can I say two things real quickly before we get to that? Yeah. One, Jericho Sims looks like he's supposed to be so good at basketball. He's got huge legs, just in great shape. And the other thing I wanted to say real quickly, you brushed over this. I don't have any thoughts on Chuma Okeke, but Chuma Okeke. Again, I'm a writer, not a speaker. But I do think Landry Shamet could be useful to them. I watched way too many Wizards games last year, and he looked better than a lot of the guys on that team, which isn't saying too much. But also the same source I had mentioned specifically that they felt like Landry Shamet could fill in a lot of what they'd be losing with Dante DiVincenzo.
Yeah, no, he gives you that, right? I think if you look at just their depth chart, like, they're not benching Deuce. They, I would imagine Campaign has the inside track on Shamet because of the playmaking ability, right? It seems like Shamet is more of just a pure shooter who can hold up on D. Maybe the defensive difference between him and Payne ultimately takes it. They also just drafted Tyler Kolek, who I like a lot, but I don't think he'll get minutes on a Tibbs contending team unless like the bottom falls out in terms of injuries. But I think it's worth mentioning Shamet. Kind of on that guard point, something that's been brought up on Knicks Twitter that I'd be curious to get your thoughts out. So Mitchell Robinson is going to play the first couple of months. You'd imagine Cat is going to start, definitely start. Probably at the 5. There's maybe a small chance they start Precious. Most would assume that the starting lineup is going to be Brunson, Hart, OG, Mikal, and Cat. But there's been people saying, maybe you should start Deuce. Obviously, he gives you a little more shooting than quite a bit more shooting than Hart. He's smaller, but probably equal at least as a point of attack defender. And the other thing is, since you really only have 3 wings right now in OG, Mikal, and Hart, it might be better to stagger them. Curious if you think that's what your thoughts are on that. Is it worth starting Deuce for the Knicks?
I don't know how Hart feels about that, to be honest, because you really don't need to make him unhappy. I don't know. I feel like I see Deuce as like their bench creator, like a guy who can kind of buoy the bench lineups with one of the guys they're staggering. Maybe Towns and him play together. So Towns will be the first guy out, and he plays with Deuce to start second quarter. I don't like and I know Deuce is a good defender, but he's a good point guard defender. You don't want him playing the 2 guard. especially against modern NBA teams. Most two guards are like 6'6", 6'7". I just don't think that you would get the benefits that you would having Deuce play the one.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. He played well with Brunson last year.
Mhm.
We've seen that like quickly was kind of the same thing as like a guy who can spot up, but also like ball handle. But yeah, no, I mean, I think we'd imagine that Hart would start. It just it gets a little tricky staggering the wings. I think that
That's why I
question.
think I think they see Sham as kind of like, I know he's like a smaller wing, but he's 6'5". I feel like they view him to be a wing. And didn't they just sign TJ Warren today?
Yeah, if we just convince him there's a global pandemic,
That could be something.
that, I saw he's only 31, and he was always a pretty. I mean, before the bubble, right, where he blew up. Um, he was a solid player, but it seems like injury issues the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's it's a good. I mean, they've definitely, you can see after last year, and maybe it was in anticipation that we're gonna make a lot of trades. They signed a lot of vets who were like, this is gonna be the 13th guy. They had Marcus Morris. Um, that was, I think, to your point, it was a little surprising to a lot of people that they opted to keep Landry Shamet over Marcus
Mhm.
Morris, just because Morris gives you the size, shooting. They were low in depth in the front court, probably more than guard with the Payne signing. It's that would definitely lend credence to the idea that they're high on Shamet. Do want to get back to Sixers potential series. Matt, am I just wrong to not be that worried about the Sixers? Maybe it's because of last year they should have won in 5, 1-6. It was a highly contested series. Embiid got his, Maxey got his, but even without I mean, they didn't have Randall, so Cat is basically a net addition there. You lose DiVincenzo. They didn't have Mitchell Robinson for half the series. I know you're probably more neutral on this, but most Knicks fans do not like Joel Embiid, and that's no coincidence. But it just seems like from a matchup standpoint, the Knicks match up so well, right? And last year, some people have mentioned. Oh, we can also talk about this. Like, Iman. I don't know if you saw this. Iman Shumpert was on ESPN, and he said, I like the Cat. The Knicks fans will get their pitchforks out for anything. They don't need an excuse. But he was saying, I like the Cat Brunson pairing on paper. I don't know if they have a guy at the end of the games. Brunson's isolation points per possession weren't great in the regular season last year. He went through a bit of a shooting slump before Randall got hurt, and then after Randall got hurt, he just had to up the volume tremendously. But it was interesting. DJ from Knicks Film School, DJ Ace NBA, for those who want to follow, does a lot of great work, watches a lot of film. And he was saying that he thinks that the shift towards guarding Brunson with wings changed things. So one, I'd be curious to your thoughts, like how much you think that is a big thing. Because his career stats in ISO are still really good. So it may be just the team started to adapt last year with him and, kind of no longer sneaking up on teams. The other thing is I don't see great matchups for Philly on defense, right? Like if they wanted to let's say they put Paul George on Brunson. Well, who's guarding Mikal Bridges, right?
They'd probably have Caleb Martin is my guess if they were to.
Good luck.
Oh,
I mean, but then it's. I mean, you put Caleb Martin on Bridges, then you're hiding Maxey on OG and Oubre on Cat. It seems very difficult for them to match up with the Knicks. Whereas I think for the Knicks, it seems pretty like you can throw. Last year, I think a big issue was they didn't have like DiVincenzo did a good job in Maxey when they finally went to that. They put OG on Maxey early in the series. That did not work out well. When they put OG on Embiid, that worked out a lot better. And when they put Dante on Maxey, they had much more success. McBride had some success too, but Maxey still had a bunch. I mean, he's an incredible player. But now you can throw Mikal Bridges there. You can free up OG to do kind of the off-ball things he does. You can put him on Paul George. You can probably hide Cat on Caleb Martin. And, if they want to run their offense through that, that's be our guest. And it just seems like the Knicks matchup. So one, how much do you buy like the idea that big wings give Brunson like an inordinate amount of trouble? And two, am I being very cocky to like not be too worried about the Sixers?
To answer one, I think Brunson, he has a very rhythmic game, right? I mean, he's kind of got that old school bucket getter to him a little bit, right? He relies a lot on footwork and pace, and using his handle to kind of gain separation and create open looks. And if you look at the 76ers series, as the series went on, he grew stronger. Like he got more used to Kelly Oubre. I'm blanking on who else they put on him. I can't. Nicholas Batum got more used to him. So I think, yeah, maybe in the regular season his efficiency is going to take a hit, right? He's going to be like league average, probably true shooting, maybe a little bit above it, depending on how the grifting's going for him that day. But I think in the playoffs, like his style is good for these grinded out series. This kind of basketball the Knicks like to play. I think as series goes on, he has more data on his opponent. He becomes stronger. So I think he's fine. Like I wouldn't say like he's one of the 4 or 5 best offensive players on the planet, but I still think he's Jalen Brunson, and he's like you said, like he can be a 1A. But to your second question, I think you are if they're healthy, if this 76ers can stay healthy, they're a very, very good team. And it would definitely be a battle with the Knicks. They have some question marks of their own though. Like obviously I like their big 3, right? If they're healthy, the theory of them. He's never given us a reason, knock on wood, to question his health. Embiid and Paul George have given us a couple. But Paul George was healthy last year. He did stay healthy.
Really underrated, I think now at this
Mhm,
point. He was
mhm.
a fringe top 10 player last year, so definitely not.
He's huge. Have you noticed that? He's huge. Guy's damn near 7
He's
feet.
bigger than
But
Mikal.
oh yeah, he's
Which is
huge.
not a short compliment. Like I
Yeah.
think that's everything. Every Knicks beat reporter was like, Mikal Bridges is the longest arms I've ever seen, and Paul
So
George
you
is
have
that with a couple extra inches. So
so you have those 3. I like Caleb Martin, right? He has that he has a little bit of Dante DiVincenzo in him where he's not afraid to take a big shot, does a lot of the little things. The power forward is going to be interesting though, and so I'm curious to see how they will have filled it out. They do have Kelly Oubre still, but he's a little bit he's not as
and
physical.
he's going
Maybe
to
you want
guard
George,
that. Like,
huh?
is he going to guard
Yeah. So
that?
I think that'll be something to find out as the season goes on. But yeah, I think short answer, yes. That's their Despite your guys' animosity towards them, they are a very skilled basketball team, a lot of talent. Matchup wise, yeah, there's a lot that might go your guys' way, but I think there's things that they could poke at themselves. It'll be interesting. It'll be fun. But then there's also the caveat of they've got to stay healthy. And I think if I had to bet, there's a better chance that this Knicks team stays healthy, which is saying a lot.
Yeah,
Than this obviously just staying healthy.
Nishinoji, right? And it's also
Yeah.
their most important player is the injury risk, right?
Yeah.
Which it's a testament to his talent. Again,
Hmm.
have no lost love for the guy after he tried to injure Mitchell Robinson, but the guy was dropping 30 that series, and he wasn't himself quite, right? So even not healthy, that's it's a tough team to deal with. But I'm feeling confident there. I did want to, I think that the kind of $64,000 question, or whatever, is can this team beat? I think that when after the Mikal trade, fans were excited. It seemed like Tibbs was going to play Randall a lot at the 5, which is like, yeah, I can see that maybe we can actually beat Boston that way. That's not really 5 out the same way, right? They now have the flexibility to do different things. And yet it just seems like if I was to be a cynic, I would say, well, Boston kind of is that, right? Already, but perfected. They've done all the wings. They have a number 1 who's good enough on that team. I actually do think the one thing the Knicks would have is they would have the best offensive player on the floor. I think he's a better offensive player than Tatum.
I agree.
But because of Tatum, again, positional value, right, being a wing, it allows them to put Derek White and Drew Holiday in those positions where we are playing a liability on defense. I think it's not as bad as maybe some other small guards, but it is a thing, and it's something that Boston can exploit. How do you see a series like that going?
I wanted you to ask me, do you think we can beat them? Because I was going to say, I think
Do you think we
anything
can
is
beat
possible.
Boston?
I think anything is possible. You can do anything you want in this life.
That's a Boston Celtic quote.
Anything's possible. I just love when Jason Tatum was like, "This is amazing." It was just so bad. He had to stop himself in the middle of it.
And then he did the Jordan crying picture too, and like
so funny. The guy's got to just get a life, man. He's got to just be his own person.
You know, the corniest thing he ever did was when Kobe died. He like screenshotted the text message, and I was like, "That's so cringe."
Yeah, it's weird because like he's such like a handsome guy. Like you think like he just kind of be himself, you know? Like I don't know, I just feel like guy that great looking, that muscular, like he could just kind of like create his own memories and just be really cool. Great leg tats, you know, like the guy could do anything.
Yeah, I mean, it always surprises me how deep his voice is because he got drafted at 18, and then like he has a very young looking face, right? So like I just expected him to kind of sound like a lot of other players, and he has this deep voice, you know. It's just
that's how Cade is. That's how Cade Cunningham is. You ever hear him talk?
Cade also just looks. Cade has like that old man look. When he was at Oklahoma State, I was like, this dude already looks like a 10-year vet, you know, like. Yeah. So like that wasn't as surprising to me, but I saw your quote too. Like I think you tweeted this, right? Like I am a Cade believer, so I like kind of that he's very low key. So that's an interesting team for sure, Detroit.
Interesting, yeah.
They probably got shooters, yeah. But yeah.
Back to your question. So I mean, I've been on the record saying like this Boston team in this league, it's so hard to go back to back, especially if you're only banking on continuity, which is kind of what the Celtics are banking on right now. And there's some like we talk about the Knicks injury issues and their depth issues. The Celtics have the same problem. If I could see a world where look at Kristaps. Kristaps is already going to be missing time, right? Now all that needs to happen is Al Horford finally slows down at 38, and then where's your center position? You know,
you're not a Luke Cornett believer.
No, not particularly. Not particularly, no. So it's like the Celtics are not. I don't see them as this juggernaut team. Now, if they played each other, the Celtics, like you said, they have a lot of things they can point at because of the fact that they usually play 4 or 5 guys who can pass, dribble, shoot. So
and defend.
That'll be interesting. Yeah, that'll be interesting. But I think if I had to say, I'm not saying the Knicks are the second best team in the East. I don't know 100% know that. But if there is a team in the East that's equipped to deal with the Celtics and what they can do, it is this iteration, the Knicks team, just having McHale, having OG, having Hart, even to some extent having Deuce. That'll defensively, just the things like because here's the thing that makes Boston really tough, and here's the thing that made Jalen Brown look like a god in the playoffs. Right? Is they have 2 huge two-way guys who can put the ball on the floor, attack, score. Right? And the thing is, most NBA teams only have like one perimeter stopper, right? Who's really like a good perimeter stopper. And so you have to put that one on Jason Tatum, right? And then Jalen Brown, whoever's like guarding him, is like kind of just like left for the Wolves. Like, for example, the Pacers series, right? They put Nesmith on Tatum, and even Nesmith was too small for Tatum, right? So he's getting the cook. And then they leave like Nembhard on Jalen Brown. Nembhard's fine defender, but like he's too small to deal with like a bulldozer like Jalen Brown, right? Whereas this next team, you have Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby, and then you have Josh Hart too. Like all 3 of those guys can put up a fight. I know Josh Hart's strong suit's not point of attack defense; it's more of the off ball defense and the rebounding and the rotations and et cetera, et cetera. But you get the point.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, I think the thing that the Knicks have to deal with that Boston doesn't is Boston's best 2 offensive players really don't have to be hit on defense, right? I think Jalen Brown is not some all-world defender. He's never a guy you're like, we're going to hunt Jalen Brown, right? That's not a thing teams do.
They should though more. They should. You know what? I wish the Cavaliers did this more. They put Brown on Max Strus. Should just have him going like run him through 1,000 like pin downs. Make him because he is not great at navigating off ball screens. That's just my thing. Like if he ends up on Bridges in that series, just use Bridges like Buddy Hield, man. Let him move around, take some threes, coming off curls. Really make Brown work.
Yeah, and I do think that's an underrated part of Bridges' game. It's
Hmm.
not until they got Dante, they just didn't do movement shooting. It's why the Evan
Hmm.
Fournier experiment was such a failure in part.
Yeah.
But I think Tibbs has always been this way. Like when they first got Isaiah Hartenstein, a lot of people probably don't remember. A, Hartenstein was coming off an Achilles injury, but B, he was kind of this big who liked to operate at the top of the key and do all the things eventually we got to see him do. And Tibbs was like, no, you're going to be Mitchell Robinson. And he struggled to adjust for a while. I think the most funny stat that I saw was when the Knicks got Hartenstein. He was like one of the top rim protectors in the league and one of the worst defensive rebounders.
Hmm.
He shored that up, and then Tibbs was like, "All right, now you can have fun on offense, right?" So I think that's kind of the same thing with DiVincenzo, where because DiVincenzo bought into the defense and all those things right off the bat and outperformed Quentin Grimes, then it was like, okay, you want to do movement shooting, you want to take your 30-foot threes, go for it, right? If Bridges is afforded that freedom off the bat, I do think it's a big thing. But I do think like where do you hide Brunson? I think is the big question to me in the Boston series because they have 5 guys at all times who can. You cannot put him on Kristaps, obviously, right? It seems like it's down to do you put him on Drew Holiday or Derek White, but both of those. I guess the best answer for me is like Derek White seems a little more versatile at this point in Drew Holiday's career. So maybe it's like
I don't know, man. Drew Holiday he was beasting Tyrese Halliburton when they
yeah,
tried to do that.
yeah, I mean, I guess that's the question, right? Do you just live with Holiday? I mean, it seems like if it's mostly going to be post ups, right, in the half
Mhm.
court, do you live with Holiday posting up Brunson, and you're like, hey, we got the ball out of Tatum's hands, we got the ball, away from like their ping, 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 just kill you with threes. That seems to me the least bad option, but yeah, where do you hide Brunson? I think is like is a big question because we obviously can't win without him on the floor.
Yeah. I mean, there's also the element of Drew Holiday's getting older. We don't know if he's going to regress. He did take a step back in the regular season. We did see him ramp up in the playoffs. Right now, I'd probably say I prefer Brunson on White, just because, like White can, run pick and roll. He can attack closeouts and all that stuff. But I think Drew Holiday's strength, and he has more experience on ball creating. So I think it would be a little bit easier for him to exploit the matchup. But that's just my thought on it. I think in the playoffs, the Mavericks had Kyrie Irving guard Derek White, if I'm not mistaken.
I do think
Um,
Kyrie's a better defender than Brunson, but it's the
People,
same kind of.
yeah, but he doesn't have that charge drawing, man. He doesn't have that Brunson charge drawing.
He doesn't believe in gravity, so.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, no, that is like the blessing and the curse. It's not just the charge is drawn, but like a lot of
Hmm.
the offensive fouls he draws are like going through screens
Hmm.
and he'll die on them. But it's like, hey, the guy stuck his leg out, and it's like, but when you don't get the call, open three, right? I do think also how they work Cat in is an interesting question there. I would imagine they'd have him in Kristaps. But you like to play him at the level. If Kristaps is popping with a wide angle, it's tough for anybody to recover too, right? You have to rely a lot on. Then you're relying on Bridges or OG to kind of pre-rotate, but then Boston is excellent at swinging the ball around. But we got to do this before we get out. Um, can you give us your NBA predictions, or I don't know if you're saving them? So
I don't. I think the Thunder are going to win the NBA championship. I guess that's my NBA prediction. I think they were a beautiful team last year, and all they did was address their two biggest weaknesses, which is lack of a true 3 and D wing and having a big physical guy. I think you know who they added in to fill that void, and then all they did was lose Josh Giddey, and that's some would argue an addition by subtraction.
yeah, and I mean, I think Caruso is as big an addition for them. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
just Caruso, Dort. We talked about versatility the Knicks can offer, but Caruso, Dort. I still think they should close with Chet at the 5 over
Mhm.
Hardenstein. I think it's a smart move though because they only gave Hardenstein 2 years. The hope would be in 2 years, Chet is physically developed enough to where you're like this is now like we don't need to play Chet more than 15, 20 minutes at the 5.
Mhm.
It's more of something we can go to and would like to go to, but we can protect him by having another big next to him a lot and have him learn to play that 4 spot. But in 2 years, maybe he's big enough where he can handle that full time, right? You think it's the Celtics they beat though, or the Celtics Knicks? That's the Eastern Conference Finals. Who are you picking?
I don't know. I don't know. Do I have to give an answer?
Yes.
I mean, just because it is so hard in this league to repeat success, and I am on the Strickland podcast. I did say I'm going to the New York Knicks.
Knicks in 7, baby.
Yeah.
Boston Garden stunned as Jalen Brunson cuts down the Nets again. I don't think they do that in the NBA. Well, thanks so much, Matt, for joining. I really appreciate your time. Appreciate all the great coverage you're doing. I've really learned a lot from reading your columns and following your tweets. So it's great to finally get to meet, I guess, in person in a sense. Is there anything you want to plug before you get out of here?
Just follow me on Twitter at Mat Issa 15. That's at MATISSA 15. I tweet out all my work. I tweet some things about stuff, players, teams, golf. But yeah, I appreciate it, Stacy. It was awesome getting to chat with you.
Cool. Yeah, no, hope to have you back on again. And yeah, thanks everyone for listening. We will have plenty of more content for you. I know Knicks fans can't wait for the season to get started, especially after the last few weeks. And thanks again, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.